Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Recycled Content, a podcast of the Association of Plastic Recyclers, an international nonprofit and the only North American organization focused exclusively on improving recycling for plastics. APR was pleased to recently announce the relaunch of the APR Recycling Demand Champions program, supported by the Recycling Partnership, which recognizes companies committed to the long-term use of North American post-consumer recycled plastic, or PCR. At a time when virgin plastic prices are dropping and imported plastic is on the rise, it's critical to recognize those companies that are supporting the North American recycling system by creating demand. Recycling is a circular system that only works if there is a steady supply of materials being collected and processed, as well as reliable demand from companies committed to buying the recycled materials. Stable demand for North American PCR is a critical step toward scaling plastic recycling, building and maintaining a circular economy, and reducing plastic waste. As with all our programs at APR, we are always evolving to ensure we are focused on what's essential to improve plastics recycling in North America. APR's Kate Eagles and Emily Tipaldo have been working on development of the new and improved program, so we're pleased to have them both on the podcast today to chat about it. Kate Eagles serves as Program Director, Policy and Markets for APR. Kate is part of the APR's legislative and regulatory team with a specific focus on recycled content, markets, and West Coast states. She also co-manages the APR Market Development Committee and the Material Recovery Facility MRF Subcommittee. Kate has worked in plastic recycling roles since 2005 at Moore Recycling Associates, Amcor, and RRS, consulting prior to the APR. She's based in Northern California. Emily Tipaldo also serves as a program manager for the Market Development Committee for APR. She focuses on demand for PCR, chemical recycling, and film recycling. Emily has been in the materials industry since 2009, including roles at the U.S. Plastics Pact, Moore Recycling, and the American Chemistry Council. So thanks to Kate and Emily for joining us today.
Thanks, Kara.
Happy to be here. Thanks, Kara. Look forward to talking.
Kate, we'll start with you. You have been the APR staff lead for Market Development Committee for quite some time. And now you co-lead that with Emily, of course, like I just mentioned. Working on demand for recycled plastics has been an issue that this committee focuses on. I briefly mentioned the importance of creating demand at a time when virgin plastic prices are dropping and imported plastic is on the rise. Tell us more about what's happening in the current market and how that affects recyclers.
Yes, absolutely. So demand really comes down to consistent purchase of post-consumer recycled resins, which we sometimes call PCR, and having multiple buyers of those PCR resins. So market depth and breadth. And factors that can negatively affect demand are, as you mentioned, lower priced alternatives. That's one factor. And lower priced alternatives can be new plastic resins. We also refer to those as virgin resins or imported post-consumer resins. And both of these can undercut the North American market production and sale of PCR because they're cheaper. So they offer an alternative that is hard to resist for manufacturers incorporating these resins. So that's a big factor in this. The other factor that I will mention is buyers coming in and out of the post-consumer resin markets with, limited contractual agreements. That also disrupts the market. And why is it important? I think if you don't have consistent end market demand, recyclers have little incentive to sort and process recycled packaging and other items, which can really lead to reduced recycling opportunities or even canceled programs. So if we want to scale up North American plastic recycling, which we do, it's vitally important to collect more recycled materials and to process them and then have the demand so that we use them in new packaging and products.
Exactly. That is the core of the APR Recycling Demand Champions program. And we want to commend those companies making the effort to support demand for North American recycled plastics. These companies basically commit to using PCR. They secure long-term PCR supply agreements and expand PCR adoption. They can do this either as a maker or a buyer of products manufactured with recycled plastics. Emily, tell us more about those two categories and how the program works.
Sure thing, Kara. So as you mentioned, we have two categories where companies, and I will also add organizations. So you could be a municipality or a state office, some sort of public office that procures products, or a school system. So it could be that sort of entity, as well as a company who buys products that include recycled plastic, specifically PCR, post-consumer recycled content in those products. So you would be a buyer of products with PCR. You could also be a company who makes products, like a finished good, with PCR. So someone who makes recycling roll cart, or someone who makes a trash can liner, or someone who makes a toy or a building product that uses post-consumer recycled content. So again, we want to be able to recognize entities, companies, or organizations that fall in either of those categories. We may even have some that overlap, that are both makers of the finished good, and then for their facilities or manufacturing sites or headquarters offices, they buy products with post-consumer recycled content. So those are the two main categories, and they have a similar process in terms of how we evaluate them for recognition. They each are asked to submit a set of data. We don't ask a lot. We realize that there are lots of different requirements of companies to report a lot of data at this point in time. So we're trying to make it easy and accessible. So they submit answers to 10, 12-ish questions. Those links are available on our website. And then the team at APR takes a look at their submission. And then we, enter into a conversation with those companies to see how we can recognize them.
Great. So a variety of ways that you can become a recycling demand champion. And let's dive a little bit deeper into that data that you mentioned they send to APR. They are evaluated based on their commitments to increasing the use of PCR using a scorecard consisting of some basic criteria. Some of these are required and some of these things are optional, but strongly recommended. So, Kate, walk us through the different criteria that the company send us.
Yes, sure, Kara. So what we look at, there's a list here. We look at percentage of post-consumer recycled resin in the applicant's portfolio. So how much PCR do you use? And then we look at utilization of North American PCR. I talked about that earlier. That's to encourage us to use the materials we recover in our own backyards, right? If we're recycling in a community, we want to make sure that material gets used. So utilization of North American PCR and percentage of PCR in the portfolio, having some percentage, are our required criteria. And then we look at a few other things. We look at long-term contracts for PCR. We also look at scoring, more points for harder to use PCR, which might be a mixed color stream. We look for PCR certification. That's a program. APR has a PCR certification that follows a chain of custody model to ensure that that's really post-consumer recycled resin. So we look for that. Do you use certified PCR or do you specify that? We look for a public commitment. Are you an entity, a company, an organization that plans to use PCR and is willing to publicly commit to that? Plans to use North American PCR. And we look at number of products. If you're someone, as Emily just describes, who is buying products made from PCR, we looked at the number of product types that you're purchasing and the protocol that encourages your company to buy products that are made with PCR. Now, as a demand champion, you may not do all of these things, but we encourage you through the scorecard to do as many as possible. Our scorecard is internal, so gives you a sense of how you are tracking against the APR criteria, although we do not publish these scores at this time. It's an internal scorecard. So that's it, unless Emily has anything to add to that list.
Yeah, Kate, I'll just add that, and I know you mentioned this, so not all of these items are requirements to become a demand champion. at the most basic level, you need to be buying post-consumer recycled content or products with post-consumer recycled content. And that content, at least a percentage of it, has to come from North American sources. Like those are kind of the bare bones things. And then these other things would increase your score in terms of how much or what the commitment is to doing them. For example, certification of PCR, as Kate mentioned, or what do you utilize long-term contracts? If so, how long are they? That sort of thing. And I think just an overarching point, what the whole purpose is and what we're driving to is trying to incentivize actions that at the end of it will support overall demand for North American recycled content. The actions that we're trying to incentivize are things that very much align with the goals of APR as a whole. Having more companies certify their material, finding greater demand for harder to use recycled content because it's mixed color or because it's film or whatever it may be. So again, we're really looking for how can we recognize companies who are taking these actions in the right direction that all support PCR demand.
Thanks, Emily. And thanks, Kate. And I do want to talk about our demand champions companies, but first, a quick break to thank our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by MCC Label. Have you noticed more and more products like yogurt or cottage cheese are using polypropylene lidding film instead of aluminum foil? Some people are confused by this because there's a perception that moving away from plastic is always more sustainable. At APR, we know this can actually be a good thing, but how can this transition make packaging more sustainable? It's a common question. While many people think sustainability means simply reducing plastic use, true sustainability is about minimizing the environmental impact across the entire packaging life cycle, and that's often overlooked. Seal Peel by MCC Global is transforming the conversation. This innovative die-cut lid made from polypropylene replaces traditional aluminum seals. Why does this matter? Producing polypropylene requires, in general, much less energy than aluminum, which means Seal Peel dramatically reduces CO2 emissions from the start. For brands committed to climate action, this is a game changer. But the impact doesn't stop there. Seal Peel enables fully monomaterial packaging, making recycling easier and boosting sorting accuracy by over 14% compared to aluminum. This innovation received APR design recognition, so you can trust Seal Peel's compatibility with the North American recycling system. Seal Peel delivers for consumers too. It peels off smoothly without tearing, flips back into place if not fully removed, and is microwave safe. That means less mess, more hygiene, and a better experience. Seal Peel is more than a lid. It's a step forward for packaging sustainability, recycling performance, and user experience. Ready to learn more? Visit iml.mcclabel.com or reach out to MCC Global's IML team for technical specs and sustainability insights. And we're back. We recognized 5 demand champion companies with our recent announcement about the program: Amcor, Charter Next Generation, Kraft Heinz, Novolex, and Triton Group. I want to talk about how each company fit the criteria to become an APR recycling demand champion. So let's start with Amcor. They state that they've been embracing circularity at the heart of their environmental stewardship, serving as a catalyst for innovation, growth, and progress. So Emily, let's start with them and tell us more about Amcor.
Sure thing. So Amcor is one of the biggest packaging converters or packaging manufacturers in the world. And as many of this audience probably know, they got even larger in this last year with their acquisition of Berry Global. And so they make packaging for a wide variety of uses. Some is food contact packaging, some is not food contact packaging. They make small things, they make big things. They convert packaging across all different types of plastic as well as other materials. So they have a lot of experience with innovation. For years, they've done a lot of great R&D across materials, but particularly in plastic packaging. They have a huge division just focused on films, and then they have another very large division focused on rigids. Because of how large they are and the variety of products that they produce, utilize PCR in a number of ways. And they just recently announced in their 2025 sustainability report that as a company, they've been able to hit their internal goal of 10% PCR usage in the packaging that they produce as an average across the board, which is massive given the size of this global company. So it's really not a small feat. And especially, I know you mentioned this, Kara, at the start of our chat, just all of the pressures that are facing the use of recycled content. And we've seen a number of companies, both in the converting space, but then that's largely a function of their own clients backing away, companies backing away from commitments. And I think it's really great to see Amcor, who's held strong and kind of looking at the long-term benefits of their own R&D and the work that they've done with their customers to be able to utilize 10% PCR across their global portfolio. So we're really excited for Amcor to be a demand champion. They're wonderful APR members. And so look forward to recognizing them this year as a demand champ.
Yes, definitely a great story at Amcor. And as you mentioned, they are an APR member and have been for quite some time. And actually, all the companies we're talking about today are APR members, but I do want to add in that is not a requirement for this program. We do accept champions across the board. You do not have to be an APR member. So I just wanted to add that in. Next up, we have Charter Next Generation, who partners with leading resin suppliers to deliver the highest quality, most consistent certified PCR materials for use across a variety of specialty film applications. So, Kate, tell us more about CNG.
Charter Next Generation is a specialty film manufacturer. They've been a big supporter of the Demand Champions program, and they purchase a range of post-consumer recycled resins for both food and non-food use in their films and specialty films. And the company has really been committed to PCR use, North American PCR use, believing it essential for them to create the value for its own business and for the business of its customers. And part of that is by reducing emissions. More recently, back in 2022, Charter Next began submitting carbon footprint to the Carbon Disclosure Project. And more recently, the company validated their climate commitments by the Science Based Targets Initiative. So this is really a part of who they are. And so Demand Champions and that sort of savings by using post-consumer material back in their products across a range of their products is really in keeping with who they are and their mission as a company.
So glad to add them as an APR recycling demand champion among many other things they're working on too. So that's great to hear. Kraft Heinz was on the podcast earlier this year talking about how their company uses the APR design guide for plastics recyclability and their U.S. Kraft mayo bottles, which are made with 100% recycled PET, among other topics. This would make them a great candidate to become an APR recycling demand champ. Emily, what else can you tell us about Kraft Heinz?
Sure. So as you mentioned, another really active APR member, they have been, I think, pretty proud of this accomplishment with their mayo bottles. I mean, it's such an iconic product for them, and to be able to utilize 100% rPET within those bottles has been a really big deal. It's been interesting to see, especially within a company as big as Kraft Heinz, like they really have the right champions, the right people within their company, the engineers who understand the technicalities when it comes to utilizing rPET. I know they have mentioned, that there's been no negative impact to their business in terms of utilizing 100% rPET in the Kraft mayo bottles because of all of the time and effort that they've put into the development of them, and they're living out their commitment that they've made in terms of putting recyclable package on the market that is also made with recycled content. So I think it's just a good shout out to the importance of having the right people in the background to be their own type of champion in a way, to bring forward more utilization of PCR and really believe that they can do it in a way that benefits the company.
Absolutely. These steps often take those champions to push things forward and make these things happen. And I have used this example a lot because it's great to see that mayo bottle made with 100% recycled content, which a lot of people think is just not possible. So that's a great example of a product that you see on your shelves every day when you go to the grocery store that is and can be made with 100% recycled plastic. Next up, we have Novolex, which recently acquired Pactive Evergreen, and they use rPET PCR sourced in North America with some products containing up to 100% PCR material, like we were just talking about. Kate, tell us more about Novolex.
Absolutely. Novolex is a large manufacturer very large, and they just had the acquisition, as you mentioned, Kara, of all kinds of packaging across the food, beverage, and specialty packaging categories. So they cover a lot of territory, and they cover a lot of market sectors. They are in food service and restaurant and carryout, also food processing, grocery, retail, and industrial sectors. So they're a large company. In addition, Novolex operates 2 polyethylene film recycling facilities at which they use feedstock sourced entirely within North America. So they not only manufacture packaging, but they also they operate assets that recover polyethylene film and process it back into recycled PCR suitable for remanufacture. So they have a commitment to this program and to using recycled content in their packaging and to recovering that as well.
Thanks, Kate. Finally, we have the Triton Group, who was on the podcast last year talking about the railroad ties that they manufacture and how they have made a public commitment to use 100% recycled plastic in their Triton tie. Emily, tell us about this commitment, the railroad ties, and how it ties in perfectly with the APR Demand Champion program.
Sure. So I think this is a good example of thinking beyond packaging, which is really important when we talk about demand for recycled content. Just knowing how difficult it can be from a technical standpoint to get recycled PCR, to get PCR back to the quality needed for food contact applications, and then the costs associated with that. So, we often are left with a lot of content that may not meet those rigorous specifications needed for food contact, but still is great manufacturing feedstock for something else. And that's where durable markets are a great opportunity for more PCR. And so Triton Group's railroad ties are an awesome example of that, where they have built a product, where they see real value in replacing some of the legacy products that are out there. They have this new composite railroad tie that utilizes a large volume of PCR and different types of recycled plastics. Particularly, it can absorb some of those things like Kate had mentioned, like harder to use recycled content, like colored material and some of the mixed polyolefins that otherwise have difficulty finding homes. So the Triton ties are a glass fiber reinforced composite used to replace traditional creosote wood railroad ties. They're stronger than hardwood and useful in environments where wood ties are really exposed to the elements, like really wet environments, humid environments, salty environments. So again, Triton Group has come up with this alternative product for the railroad industry. They're also unique in that a little bit sort of somewhat similar in some ways to what Kate described about Novolex is they're an integrated company. So they're operating both as a reclaimer for the polyolefins, as well as then a end product manufacturer, and in this case, the Triton ties. So they've been able to utilize their commitment to 100% PCR in the Triton ties. Again, as I mentioned, they can use a blend of materials, which is helpful in trying to use up some of that material on the market that otherwise wouldn't have a market or a home. And I know they're looking at challenging others. Triton's challenging others within APR to think about, are there other durable markets that APR as an association could support so we can create more demand for large volumes of material?
That was a great one to end on, because it is so important to talk about those diverse markets and how important they are for recycling. There are lots of long-lasting, durable products like a railroad tie or a whole host of other products that recycled plastics can go into. A lot of times people only focus on packaging, but these durable goods and other applications like railroad ties, decking, and so many others are really important to the health of recycling markets. So that was a great one to end with there. So finally, to wrap up today, Kate, I'll start with you. Anything else you want to add in about the APR Recycling Demand Champions program?
Well, just to follow up on what you and Emily were just talking about, not everyone can make a product with recycled content, but a lot of folks can. So please check out those scorecards and check out the program online. But I will say that many, many folks can buy products with recycled content in them. We talked about this a little bit. If you are a business that uses trash bags, if you use totes, if you use, recycling bins, a lot of this stuff could have recycled content. So many, many folks can work with their procurement and purchasing folks to see if they can specify that in their procurement requirements. So that one, we encourage folks to check out and to consider it. And one more thing I want to say, Kara, is that I think so often in recycling, people kind of really focus on collection. And I really want to emphasize that we all here at APR want to scale recycling. We want to see plastic recycling grow. But if we collect more, we have to use more. And I think markets are very important to help us do that. And so we want this program to focus on North American markets, as we've talked about, and to really encourage folks to consider this and to look at what they might do.
I was just going to add in, I'm glad you mentioned about going back to our two different categories, the makers and the buyers. So all of the companies that we talked about today are makers of products with recycled content, but we don't want to forget those buyers can be recycling demand champions too. And procurement is so important when you're looking for these products to go into your facilities, into your business. Look for those products that Kate mentioned that are made with recycled plastics. And so, Emily, what about you?
So, Kara, so I will say, Kraft Heinz is a buyer.
Oh, okay.
So we are very glad that we have them as a buyer.
Thanks for that correction. So they're both.
Yes, we have lots of room for more. And I would say if companies aren't sure, or as Kate mentioned, aren't sure of what they could be buying, but if you're somewhat interested, please do reach out to us and we'd be happy to chat with you, because I think it is one of those things that may not be completely obvious, but we can point you in lots of helpful directions if you're interested in buying more products with PCR. And then the other thing I think too is just piling on about how important demand is, and North American demand. Like we need it if folks expect to continue to recycle their plastic products, because without demand, the system will implode on itself. And we're seeing that in other parts of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And we could be the next ones to fall if we don't shore up our demand. So just how important it is. And I would say as well that APR takes very seriously true demand. And that's why we're so focused on trying to incentivize certification. We know there have been a lot of shenanigans over the last 15 years or so with people claiming things are materials PCR when it's really not PCR. And so we're very tuned into that. And again, trying to recognize, and we really want to recognize those companies who are doing the right things to support recycling and support demand for plastic recycling, and hope to be able to do more of that.
Absolutely. Definitely hope to do more of that and recognize more companies, many who are both makers and buyers, like you mentioned. You can be both, or you can be one or the other to be a part of this program. So all important points right at the end there. So thanks, Kate, and thanks, Emily. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. For more information about the APR Recycling Demand Champion Program and much more, visit the APR website at plasticsrecycling.org. Check us out on LinkedIn, Facebook, and X at APR Recycles. We want to hear from you, so feel free to contact APR at info@plasticsrecycling.org. And you can find recycled content wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to subscribe, like, rate, and review.
This podcast was recorded in the studios of
Policy Resolution